Okay. Alrighty, so let's begin with chapter 1, Wanda. So today, Monday, Wanda Petronsky was not in her seat, but nobody, not even Peggy and Madeline, the girls who started all the fun, noticed her absence. Usually, Wanda sat in the next to the last seat in the last row in room 13. She sat in the corner of the room where the rough boys who did not make good marks on their report cards sat. The corner of the room where there was most scuffling of feet, most roars of laughter when anything funny was said, and most mud and dirt on the floor. Wanda did not sit there because she was rough and noisy. On the contrary, she was very quiet and rarely said anything at all, and nobody had ever heard her laugh out loud. Sometimes she twisted her mouth into a crooked sort of smile, but that was all. Nobody knew exactly why Wanda sat in that seat unless it was because she came all the way from Boggins Heights, and her feet were usually caked with dry mud, and she picked up coming down the country roads. Maybe the teacher liked to keep all the children who were apt to come in with dirty shoes in one corner of the room, but no one really thought much about Wanda Petronsky once she was in the classroom. The time they thought about her was outside of school hours, at noontime, when they were coming back to school, or in the morning, early before school began, when groups of 2 or 3 or even more would be talking and laughing on their way to the schoolyard. Then sometimes they waited for Wanda to have fun with her. The next day, Tuesday, Wanda was not in school either, and nobody noticed her absence again, except the teacher and probably Big Bill Byron, who sat in the seat behind Wanda's, and who could now put his long legs around her empty desk, one on each side, and sit there like a frog, to the great entertainment of all in his corner of the room. But on Wednesday, Peggy and Maddie, who sat in the front row along with other children who got good marks and didn't track in a whole lot of mud, did notice that Wanda wasn't there. Peggy was the most popular girl in school. She was pretty, she had many pretty clothes, and her auburn hair was curly. Maddie was her closest friend. The reason Peggy and Maddie noticed Wanda's absence was because Wanda had made them late to school. They had waited and waited for Wanda to have some fun with her, and she just hadn't come. They kept thinking she'd come any minute. They saw Jack Bagels running to school, his necktie askew and his cap of a precarious tilt. They knew it must be late, for he always managed to slide into his chair exactly when the bell rang, as though he were making a touchdown. Still, they waited one more minute more and 1 minute more, hoping she'd come, but finally they had to race off without seeing her. The 2 girls reached their classroom after the doors had been closed. The children were reciting in unison the Gettysburg Address, for that was the way Miss Mason always began the session. Peggy and Maddie slipped into their seats just as the class was saying the last lines. That these dead shall not have died in vain, that the nations shall under God have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Chapter 2, The Dresses Game. After Peggy and Maddie stopped feeling like intruders in a class that had already begun, they looked across the room and noticed that Wanda was not in her seat. Furthermore, her desk was dusty and looked as though she hadn't been there yesterday either. Come to think of it, they hadn't seen her yesterday. They had waited for her a little while, but had forgotten about her when they reached school. They often waited for Wanda Petronsky to have fun with her. Wanda lived way up on Boggins Heights, and Boggins Heights was no place to live. It was a good place to go and pick wildflowers in the summer, but you always held your breath till you got safely past old man Svensson's yellow house. People in the town said old man Svensson was no good. He didn't work, and worse still, his house and yard were disgracefully dirty, with rusty tin cans strewn about and even old straw hat. He lived alone with his dog and his cat. No wonder, said the people of the town. Who would live with him? and many stories circulated about him, and the stories were the kind that made people scurry past his house in even broad daylight and hope not to meet him. Beyond Svenson's, there were a few small scattered frame houses, and in one of these, Wanda Petronsky lived with her father and her brother Jake. Wanda Petronsky, most of the children in room 13 didn't have names like that. They had names easy to say, like Thomas, Smith, or Allen. There was one boy named Bounce, Willie Bounce, and people thought that was funny, but not funny in the same way that Petronsky was. Wanda didn't have any friends. She came to school alone and went home alone. She always wore a faded blue dress that didn't hang right. It was clean, but it looked as though it had never been ironed properly. She didn't have any friends, but a lot of girls talked to her. They waited for her under the maple trees on the corner of Oliver Street, or they surrounded her in the schoolyard as she stood watching some little girls play hopscotch on the worn, hard ground. Wanda, people would say in a most courageous manner, as though she were talking to Miss Mason or to the principal perhaps. Wanda, she'd say, giving one of her friends a nudge, tell us, how many dresses did you say you had hanging up in your closet? 100, said Wanda. 100, exclaimed all the girls incredulously, and the little girls would stop playing hopscotch and listen. Yeah, 100, all lined up, said Wanda. Then her thin lips drew together in silence. What are they like? All silk, I bet, said Peggy. Yeah, all silk, all colors. Velvet too? Yeah, velvet too. 100 dresses, repeated Wanda stolidly, all lined up in my closet. Then let her go, and then before she'd gone very far, they couldn't help bursting into shrieks and peals of laughter. 100 dresses? Obviously, the only dress Wanda had was the blue one she wore every day. So what did she say she had 100 for? What a story. And the girls laughed derisively while Wanda moved over to the sunny place by the ivy-covered brick wall of the school building, where she usually stood and waited for the bell to ring. But if the girls had met her at the corner of Oliver Street, they'd carry her along with them for a way, stopping every few feet for more incredulous questions. And it wasn't always dresses they talked about. Sometimes it was hats or coats or even shoes. How many shoes did you say you had? 60? 60 pairs or 60 shoes? 60 pairs, all lined up in my closet. Yesterday you said 50. Now I got 60. Cries of exaggerated politeness greeted this. All alike? Said the girls. Oh no, every pair is different, all colors, all lined up, and Wanda would shift her eyes quickly from Peggy to a distant spot, as though she were looking far ahead, looking but not seeing anything. Then the outer fringe of the crowd of the girls would break away gradually, laughing, and little by little in pairs. The group would disperse. Peggy, who had thought of this game, and Maddie, her inseparable friend, were always the last to leave. And finally, Wanda would move up the street, her eyes dull and her mouth closed tight, hitching her left shoulder every now and then, in the funny way she had, finishing the walk to school alone. Peggy was not really cruel. She protected small children from bullies, and she cried for hours if she saw an animal mistreated. If anybody had said to her, "Don't you think that this is a cruel way to treat Wanda?" she would have been very surprised. Cruel? What did the girl want to go and say she had 100 dresses for? Anybody could tell that was a lie. Why did she want to lie? And she wasn't just an ordinary person. Else, why would she have a name like that? Anyway, they never made her cry. As for Maddie, this business of asking Wanda every day how many dresses and how many hats and how many this and that she had was bothering her. Maddie was poor herself. She usually wore somebody's hand-me-down clothes. Thank goodness she didn't live up on Boggins Heights or have a funny name, and her forehead didn't shine the way Wanda's round one did. What did she use on it? Sapolio? That's what all the girls wanted to know. Sometimes when Peggy was asking Wanda those questions in the mock polite voice, Maddie felt embarrassed, and studied the marbles in the palm of her hand, rolling them around and saying nothing herself. Not that she felt sorry for Wanda exactly. She would never have paid any attention to Wanda if Peggy hadn't invented the dresses game. But suppose Peggy and all the others started in on her next. She wasn't as poor as Wanda, perhaps, but she was poor. Of course, she would have more sense than to say 100 dresses. Still, she would not like them to begin on her. Not at all. Oh dear, she did wish Peggy would stop teasing Wanda Petronsky. Perfect. All right. So after reading this, or at least both of these chapters, I could observe that Wanda was kind of like the type of girl who wanted to fit in, and she would continue telling lie after lie, um, after lie after lie, especially with the dresses and the hats and the shoes. And eventually, her friends, or also called girlfriends that she had, started catching up to her and thinking now that she was a big phony. I did notice also in the story that, which doesn't say how old Wanda is, but I do like how Wanda stands up for herself, regardless of how much the girls are teasing her. Why do you think the girls keep asking Wanda these absurd questions when they already knew she was exaggerating about the dresses, coats, and shoes? Anybody?
I think that they do it just to keep making fun of her, just to keep picking at her because they find that fun.
That's
Yeah, I feel like they kind of want to hear like what she's like, what kind of outrageous numbers she would want to say next, based on what they ask her to.
Yeah,
yes, I completely agree. Go ahead.
I was just gonna kind of bounce off of that because just seeing how far she'll go, because like she was saying, just what kind of random numbers she can come up with next.
You know, what I got to thinking after reading this is Wanda always tends to just answer these girls' questions. I know she just doesn't cry, she doesn't show any type of emotion towards any of these questions, just besides answering them. But what made me really think is why doesn't she also ask these questions? She can't be the only girl who's going, through these struggles, even though they don't really describe how poor she is, you know?
Yeah,
Why doesn't she ask the girls questions?
and it's also sad because even that Maddie girl is poor too, so she can't even like stick up for Wanda, who would also, I guess they guess she's poor too, based on like the one dress she only wears.
That's a good point of view. And actually, I did want to ask also that why do you guys think Maddie doesn't have the courage to tell Peggy something about teasing Wanda, either stopping or, just get her attention and letting her know that it might be making her feel bad?
I think that she's just afraid of it turning back on her and then focusing on her. I think that she would rather somebody else take the heat rather than her be the one in the spotlight and always being talked down to.
Yeah. Plus, also, I guess what is it? What's her name? Peggy. Like she doesn't think it's being cruel. Like the way she's talking about, like Maddie can see that it is being cruel as like an outsider point of view. And so she doesn't want to face she doesn't want to be part of that cruelty.
Yes, I completely agree as well. That's what I was thinking as too, that she just didn't want to be in the spotlight. She's one of those, even though she stands up for bullies, at the same time, she is actually being a bully to Wanda
Yeah.
without her even noticing, that she is. In the story, I didn't like how they describe Wanda. I don't know if you guys paid attention, but it specifically kind of states that she's very dirty. She wears a faded blue dress that doesn't hang right. They also kind of mention her forehead being shiny and round. Kind of be very specific on details of how she looks physically. Well, I think that's all the questions I had.
One thing I do want to mention is y'all noticed how she was like missing at first, like she wasn't at her desk.
Oh
I
yeah.
wonder like why she wasn't there. Maybe because they were bullying her, and so she didn't want to come back to school.
That's a very good point of view.
They didn't
I
even
didn't
like
think
they
about
just
that.
like slid right past that, didn't even like kind of mention it, and she just showed back up at school one day, right? Or did I
That
miss
is
it?
very
Yeah.
true. They could have been teasing her. It might have, well, that doesn't like describe how she feels about the teasing and whatnot. But yeah, it could be that as well. Or they don't ever mention anything about, besides that she has a father and a brother. Are they really a good support system when she comes home and expresses her, how they're treating her at school? You know what I mean?
And the fact that no one really like noticed that she was gone until like her bullies noticed that she was gone, you know?
Only because they wanted to bully her.
Exactly. They didn't have like a source of like anything to make fun of.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Um,
can definitely
I have
agree.
a question. Did it ever mention her mom?
I don't think so. I think that she only lives with her brother and her dad.
I wonder
Yes.
if that's part of the reason, like I said, that her dress looked like it hadn't been ironed. Like, I wonder if that's part of the reason she looks like that.
Oh,
Mm.
that's a
There's
good point of view.
She doesn't have a role model at home
Mm-hmm.
or somebody that, that would be able to keep her tidy.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, that's a very good thought. Thank you for bringing that up, Whitney.
Mhm.
Well, I believe that was it from my end. Did you guys have any questions? Any doubts? Anything you guys want to add?
Or
No.
like the part where somebody else gives you feedback, is that on here or is that one-on-one?
It's just that she's gonna type it. You guys just type it out yourself.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Should I
And then
stop
is that kind
recording?
of like just like sent to you or sent to her like in the submission, or how does that work?
So I think I'll type it and then I'll send her the type of the feedback. Because on the document it says to get the, what does it say? To send it to her, I guess. Right? Am I
Yes.
reading that? Okay.
Yes, I believe that's what it says.
Okay, should I stop recording here?